Hey, welcome back. I was walking through the New York Public Library the other day, just letting my fingers trail along the spines of thousands of books in the history section. And I had this overwhelming, almost physical feeling of safety. The sheer weight of all that paper, all that ink, all those preserved thoughts. It felt like a fortress. But then my mind did what it often does. It flipped the image. I pictured that fortress on fire. I pictured not just the loss of stories, but the loss of entire worlds. And that's what brought me here, to a story about one of the most catastrophic acts of cultural destruction in human history. An act that wasn't just about burning paper, but about erasing a way of seeing the universe itself. I'm Ibnul Jaif Farabi, and this is The Great Conversation. We're talking today about the Pre-Columbian Codexes of Mesoamerica and why their burning was an act of genocide. Now, when we hear codex, we might think of a dusty, leather-bound book from medieval Europe. But the Mesoamerican Codex was something entirely different. Imagine a long strip of fig bark paper or deerskin, folded like a concertina or an accordion. These weren't books you paged through left to right. You unfolded them, sometimes stretching out over 20 feet, a continuous canvas of thought. And they weren't written in an alphabet as we know it. They were painted in a complex, vibrant system of pictograms and logograms. A visual language where a glyph of a rabbit next to a hill wasn't just Rabbit Hill, but could signify a specific date, a god, an entire historical event. These were living documents. They were histories, calendars, genealogies, tax records, ritual guides, and maps of the cosmos, all woven together. The Maya, the Aztecs, the Mixtecs, they didn't separate the sacred from the secular, the historical from the prophetic. A single codex could tell you when to plant your corn, trace your king's lineage back to a divine ancestor, and predict the fate of the current world cycle. It was the operating system for their civilization. Then, in the early 16th century, the Spanish arrived. And with them came men of faith, like Bishop Diego de Landa in the Yucatan. To these friars, these strange, beautiful, painted books were not just alien, they were diabolical. They saw the glyph of a god not as a complex theological symbol, but as a literal idol on a page. They heard the chants and rituals described within as proof of Satan worship. The Spanish mission was clear: to save souls. And in their theological framework, saving souls required the utter destruction of the old beliefs. So, in a series of systematic, public spectacles, they gathered these codexes, these books of the devil, as Landa called them, and set them ablaze. Landa himself famously wrote, "We found a large number of books, and, as they contained nothing in which there were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all." Imagine the scene: the smell of burning ink and fig bark, the crackle of centuries of knowledge turning to ash in a single afternoon. It was a holocaust of memory. And this is where we have to understand the true gravity of what happened. This wasn't just a book burning. It was, by the United Nations' own definition, an act of cultural genocide. Genocide isn't only the physical killing of people, it's also destroying the essential foundations of their life as a group. Their culture, their history, their language, their records. When you burn every single book of a people, you are attempting to murder their past, and therefore their future. You sever the connection between generations. You make it impossible for their descendants to know how their ancestors understood time, astronomy, medicine, or law. You collapse their universe into rubble and then hide the blueprint. The Spanish, perhaps unintentionally in some cases, were executing the perfect epistemological crime. They weren't just conquering land. They were conquering reality, replacing one complete way of knowing the world with another. After the burnings, the indigenous scribes, the Tlaquilos, were often forced to use the European alphabet to write down histories. But the framework was now a Christian one. The very grammar of thought had been altered. Now, here's the painful twist of irony that always gets me. Our primary source for much of what we do know about the Maya codices that were lost? It's Bishop Diego de Landa himself. Later in his life, he wrote a detailed account of Maya culture, relation to Las Cosas de Yucatan. In it, he meticulously recorded their calendar, their glyphs, their customs. It's as if he realized, too late, the magnitude of what he had destroyed, and in a fit of guilty conscience, tried to reconstruct it from memory. His work became the very key, centuries later, that allowed scholars like Yuri Norizov to begin deciphering the few Maya codices that survived in European libraries, hidden away as curiosities. So we are left with this haunting paradox. The destroyer also became a chief preserver, but it's a preservation through a shattered lens. We're reading the fragments of a library, translated by the man who lit the match. As an engineer, I think in systems. And what gets me about this story is the catastrophic system failure it represents. A civilization built a magnificent, complex data structure, the Codex. It was their database, their sacred text, their scientific journal. And the colonial encounter introduced a virus, the idea that this data was not just wrong, but evil. The system wasn't integrated or updated. It was forcibly wiped and reformatted. As a storyteller, and as someone who grew up between the rich oral and written traditions of Bangladesh and the vast archives of the West, I feel the chill of that loss in my bones. It's a reminder that every library, every archive, every story passed down is a defiance against that kind of extinction. We preserve not just for knowledge, but for justice, for the simple, profound right of a people to narrate their own existence. So what remains? A heartbreakingly small number. The Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, named for the European cities where they eventually landed, survivors of the flames. The Grolier Codex, authenticated only recently. For Maya books, that's it. From the Aztec world, maybe a dozen or so pre-Columbian examples survived, like the breathtakingly beautiful Borja group, likely from the Mixtec region. These survivors are ghosts. They are the whispers of what was once a vast, humming conversation across centuries. When we look at them now, we're not just looking at art or archaeology. We're looking at the charred edges of a universe. We're witnessing the aftermath of a crime against human consciousness. The takeaway for me is this. History is written by the victors, yes, but it is also unwritten by them. To burn a book is an act of violence, but to burn a world's entire library is an act of annihilation. It's a warning that echoes far beyond the 16th century. It asks us what we choose to preserve, what stories we deem worthy of safekeeping, and what fragile systems of knowledge we might be overlooking or even silencing today. Our collective human story is a precarious library. It's our job to be its fierce and grateful guardians. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Great Conversation. If this journey into the lost worlds of thought resonated with you, please share it with someone. It's through these conversations that we keep the stories alive. For more deep dives into history, literature, and the ideas that shape us, visit our home at Light Not Studios. https://www.lightnotstudios.com. I've been Ibnul Jaif Farabi. Until next time, take care.